Well, hey there, Two Rivers. If you were with us this past Sunday, you know that we had one of the biggest announcements that we've had in the life of our church. We have a significant leadership transition on the horizon. And if you haven't seen that sermon, watch that video, make sure you hop on over to our social media or website, grab the app and check out that video. You'll want to see and experience that in its original form. But we wanted to come to you today to fill in the gaps of some of the things that we shared then. The bottom line is that I'm going to be transitioning out of my role as lead pastor at Two Rivers Church, and God has called John to step in and to take over that leadership. And we thought it'd be good to just take a few minutes today, fill in some of the gaps, some of the details, but maybe most importantly, give John a chance to share a little bit from his perspective what God has been up to. And it was a couple years ago now, which seems like forever ago and yesterday, that I began just to get a sense from the Lord that He was orchestrating a change. And I remember processing what God was doing in my story and what He was preparing me for. And I remember uttering this phrase that John Teague could lead this church. And I don't know if you've ever just said something, but when you say it, it's like it becomes true when it came out. And those words ended up being prophetic. And over the next 18 months or so, as those words are kind of in the backdrop of my mind, and unbeknownst to everybody else, I began to see just how true those words were. And I got to watch as God was preparing me for what was next for me. He was also preparing John for what he was going to be called to. I would watch John preach, and I would see our people respond to him in ways that was just new. You had an authority and have an authority that I could tell God was doing something. As John has led our staff, I could see how our team would respond to his leadership, and even the vision that God was giving John to lead, it was different than just running out what I had asked him to do, but instead God was birthing new things for our church through you, and then we would just respond. And so I began to get just this confirmation that God is working, and it's just fun to see God move and to do what He does. And really, it's been the easiest decision I've ever made as a leader, as I thought about who my recommendation and endorsement would be to the elders to take over the leadership of our church. And of course, our elders, once they received the news, were in unanimous endorsement and are excited about what God has in store for us as a church. So let's go back, John, to January the 6th, Epiphany. The day that I dropped this bomb on you, we had snuck away to a cabin, and we were going to do some planning of a kind you were not anticipating. What was going on in your mind in the moment that I shared the big news with you?
Well, he leads off with, I'd like to process something with you, which I'm like, okay, yeah, let's do it. And then you drop the big news on me, and I believe I remember awkwardly smiling, not knowing what else to do, and then saying, okay. And as he's going on, my mind is racing. What does this mean for me? What does this mean for our church and the families and our community? And I'm also trying to think, my friend's here telling me his story about what God's doing in his life, and I need to be listening to that. So I'm trying to be present, and at the same time thinking this thought, I hope he says, I'm next. And I remember you starting to go that direction and beginning to affirm the things that you've seen in me, some of the things that you just said. And there was this voice inside of me that was, I've called him 7-year-old John, who was saying, you can't do this. And at the same time, this deeper, more fatherly voice saying, yes, you can. Don't freak out that your lead pastor candidate is hearing voices. This was the Spirit of God speaking to me and affirming something that you were saying that I needed to hear. And I was a little bit scared right out of the gate, and yet I was also excited. Like I was feeling that. I'm scared, but I'm excited. And the reality is God had been speaking to me about this already. I look back to my journal, and about 5 days before you told me this, I woke up on a Saturday morning, sat straight up in bed, and it's like the Lord woke me up and he gave me a word for the year, which I'm not a word of the year kind of guy, but he said this word to me. This year is about strength. And of course I thought, yeah, I'm gonna start working out and thinking about gains, and then he said, no, it's I'm gonna teach you how to live out of a strength that is far greater than your own. You're going to need a strength that is more than you have. And I thought, ooh, I wonder what that's all about. Of course, I find out, a week later that this is exactly what God had in mind. And so now all of a sudden I'm like, okay, this is starting to make sense.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. One of the things that I said to you back in the cabin as you began to process, obviously, a lot at the same time. But what I knew is that we were weighing and testing at this time. And I felt like God had given me some clarity, but obviously it involved you. We brought it, beyond you. And I said, John, if your wife isn't 100% on board, then this isn't going to work. Because God doesn't just call, one person. You guys are together, a unit. And so tell us what your wife thinks about all of this, Katie.
Yeah, so when I brought Katie into the loop, I would say total shock would be her first response.
Yeah.
And then there were tears, which I think is a very real, natural, reasonable response. As I think back on how she responded, I think about how our friendship has gone all the way back to 2006 and how our families have done life together. When we say we do life together, it was because we experienced something so sweet that we wanted everyone to encounter that. We had houses where the backyards touched and our kids played. It was like one big backyard, like you trained your dog to poop in my yard.
I did.
I
did.
True story. And so all of this is, I think, swirling. It's like we came here, we moved our family here to do this with you guys, and so there was a sense of shock and just an emotional reaction. But after some processing and some talking and some tears, we were driving around and we landed. We had just had to get away and get out of the house, and we landed in the Chick-fil-A parking lot. And we're eating some Chick-fil-A in the car, and I remember looking over at her and her looking at me in the eye and just saying, "You can do this." And that's all I needed to hear. And guys, you married guys, the power in those words from your wife. So I know that just as people are curious about kind of what my response was and how Katie was processing all of this, I think there's also some curiosity about, like, what does this look like for you going forward?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, because in the beginning I knew that God was preparing me for something else. I knew that the assignment that God had given me, I had completed to start this church, and I just knew, and my knowers of knowers, as a friend would say, that God was calling you to really lead the church that I was called to plant. But in the same time, I had to weigh and process and test what is it that God is preparing me for. And some of you know I've got a business degree, and I've started a couple little businesses. And I remember there's a couple little experiences, but there was this sense that it's like there is something inside of me that has to find its way out. And it wasn't this impetuous need to do something. It was as if God has put something in my DNA that it's now ready to see the light of day. And so for me, it was like, what would it look like to take the passions and the gifts that I have for the Lord and, of course, for the church, but also see these gifts move into the marketplace. And so I have always had an interest in real estate and in development. And so as I began to dream and pray and talk Ultimately, the door that God has opened for me has been to work in real estate development with a really good friend of mine. But in all of this, one of the deals that I made with God was that I don't want to leave. I don't want to move. I don't want to not be a part of this incredible mission and movement that we've been a part of for 8 years now. And so in all of this, I'm going to be able to stay here. I'm going to stay in the house that we're in. Our kids going to stay in the school that they're at. And maybe most importantly, I'm going to be able to be a part of Two Rivers. And though I'll be on a different seat on the bus, I'll still get to serve and still get to use the gifts that God has given me, because I do know that I'm also a pastor at heart. And so I've got these passions and love just for the people of God to lead and to love and to shepherd. And so I know that when it's appropriate, there's going to be a time again for me to use those gifts that God has deposited into me to see that the church, the bride of Christ, is cared for and strengthened.
So what are next steps now?
Yeah, so, well, a couple of things. And again, if you were here on Sunday, you know that in just about 2 weeks, on March the 14th, we're going to be taking a vote. So we are a congregational church, and there are a few things that we vote on, and the installation of a new lead pastor is going to be one of them. And so we'll be voting the members of Two Rivers in church to affirm you as our next lead pastor. So this is a pretty big deal. So that's something that we all can anticipate. And I know this is going to hit different people in different ways, and everyone gets permission to process in very human ways. And that's okay. It belongs. And as I've shared this with just a few people, I've gotten all kinds of different reactions, and I think it's appropriate wherever you are. But as you need to have more questions answered, or you love to connect with an elder, we've made the elders available. And so you can email or text or get a coffee or lunch with one of our elders who would love to process anything that you feel like would be appropriate to process. But I think the biggest thing is just to pray. We believe that God has orchestrated this. I don't think I or you or any of us are clever enough to put this thing together. So we're asking everyone to really pray. Pray for us during this transition. Pray for our church, as it's been a crazy year already. And yet we believe and are confident that God is preparing us for what he has in store for us, and it's going to be incredible. Pray for John and Katie and their family as they transition into this new role, as he continues to be a part of the adventure that he's been called to. And pray for yourself. Pray bold prayers that God would continue to remind you that Jesus' promise is that he would build his church, and the gates of hell will not come against it. God uses different leaders in different seasons, but his mission and the vision that he's given us will always remain the same. And that's what we get to partner together with into the future, no matter who is at the lead pastor spot.
Yeah, we know that change is hard. Change is a challenge. That doesn't mean that just because it gets hard that God's not in it. So we know that it's going to be different, but I'm excited about where God is leading us. I'm excited about the fact that we're beginning to gather again, that our groups are starting to do life together again, that we're starting to open the doors to the community again, that we're looking at a building project on the land that we're celebrating. And there is a lot in store for us at Two Rivers Church. And so I'm really excited, and we can be praying into those things and asking the Lord, what role does he want me to play in this?
Awesome. Well, we are so grateful for every one of you. We're thankful for your hearts and for your time today to listen and watch this. Very excited about what God has in store for us together in the future. God bless you.